Thank you for joining us on the program, Justin.
Thank you for having me, Carmen.
During our session, our viewers have been learning about softness. As the originator of Tai Chi Chih, how important is this to their practice?
Softness is all important in Tai Chi Chih, both philosophically and physically. From a physical standpoint, if we move with tension, if the muscles are tight and we're stiff in this manner, what happens is that the chi, the intrinsic energy, does not flow freely through the channels of the body. When, however, we move softly with no muscular tension, the chi can flow freely and we can learn how to balance the chi. So from the physical standpoint, it's very important. Psychologically, in life, I think we may learn the lesson that softness often is much stronger than firmness. I'll give you an example of that. In the Orient, they talk a good deal about the bamboo tree and the sturdy oak tree. The sturdy oak tree stands this way and faces the wind when there's a storm and resists and then suddenly topples. But the bamboo tree is very pliant, very pliable. When the wind comes, the bamboo tree gracefully bends back and stays there until the wind has passed and there's no longer a storm. Then it slowly snaps back to its original position, unharmed. Now, there's much to be learned from that, but that is all important in Tai Chi Chih. Another example is the fact that the tongue is soft, but the teeth are hard. But the tongue outlasts the teeth. The water is soft, rocks are hard, but the water wears away the rocks. We could give any number of examples how softness works. And I think that people, as they learn Tai Chi Chih, will find that this lesson may spill over into their everyday lives.
I think that probably our audience has found that it already has started to work in their lives right now, even with the short time that we've been together. I know that some of my students have told me how that softness really does influence their life later.
Well, I think that your students are going to hear you say softness and continuity a good deal. I know of many Tai Chi Chih teachers who write it on a blackboard and they keep referring to it. And finally, about the fifth lesson, somebody will say, oh, you want softness and continuity. Right. Why don't you say so?
Right.
Softness is all important in the practice, and it will feel good. When you do something with no strain, then you get the benefit of it. You feel that you are relaxed and so forth. Good example of that happens when people come in off a freeway of a big city and they're very tense. But after they've been doing Tai Chi Chih for a little while, they no longer move in a hard manner where their wrists are stiff. They begin to relax, they feel better, and they get the benefits. Sometimes they're sorry when the lesson is over.
Sometimes they notice it in their waist too, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes. When I look at a new student, I look at the waist and the wrists. If the wrists are like this, I know there's no tension. If the waist turns very freely, there's nothing inside that's holding it up. So we can say that one of the really strong principles of Tai Chi Chih is softness, and I'm sure all of your students will learn it. For the new student, there is nothing more important than learning the correct way to move. The movements themselves are easy to learn, and they're easy to do. If the student starts out by learning how to move in an effortless manner from the center, there'll be no problem in learning Tai Chi Chih. The ideal is to move effortlessly or to flow effortlessly through very heavy air, which seems like a contradiction. But once the student begins doing the movements, he or she will understand what we mean. We are flowing through very heavy air without any effort, It's what we call the effort of no effort. And we are really flowing from the center of the body. I'm going to stand up and show you what I mean by that.
Would you please?
When we move from the spot 2 inches below the navel. And then when we begin to move the hands, we find that there is no effort involved. There's no muscular tension at all. This is much different than just moving the hands and the legs. And a very important point is this. When we finish the movement, we come to a graceful conclusion, and we finish with the hands parallel to the ground and hold that for a few seconds. I'll explain why that it's very necessary. When we begin to move, the yin chi and the yang chi separate. That is, the positive energy and the negative energy separate. And in a sense, we are fragmented. When we come to the conclusion of the movement and we come to the rest in this fashion, then the yin chi and the yang chi flow together again, and once again we're whole. What this is in the Orient is returning to the uncarved block. That is the state, the ecstatic state, before there is any fragmentation, any separation. And we hope by balancing the chi, we will return to the state, which the Zen people call your face before you were born.
The most important thing, though, for beginners is to know that when they move, that they're just moving so softly. I was noticing your hands as you were moving, and they were, they would have moved in either direction. That they weren't stiff like a board. That when you were flowing, you picked a place below the navel to move from.
Well, flowing smoothly from the center is really one with softness. Flowing effortlessly, and remember the word is flowing, not moving. Flowing softly from the center naturally brings with it a softness in doing it. Mm-hmm. And then the chi flows very freely. You also notice that these movements tend to be round. They tend to be circular. Whether we go round like this or we push like this, but go down slightly and come up and over in sort of an ellipse motion, we're doing a circular movement. And the secret of energy has to do with circularity. Just look at the windmill, picking up the energy as it goes. Flow effortlessly through very heavy air, and all the rest will take care of itself.
Well, that's good advice for us as we move through our daily lives, to move effortlessly, not just while we do Tai Chi Chih, but also daily. I'm sure that everybody, including myself, needs to hear about that. What can you tell us about this mysterious chi?
Well, chi really is the basis of the whole ball game. When we talk of chi, we're talking of the intrinsic energy, that is the vital force, which is really the life energy. For instance, if we meet somebody on the street for the first time and we feel rather bad vibes, what we're feeling is the character of the chi that is flowing. When I was living with the yogis in the Himalayan foothills in India, we would meet late in the morning for our one meal of the day, and there was a good deal of talk. Almost all of it had to do with prana or kundalini, which are other names for chi. They're Sanskrit names. Prana is the universal energy, the intrinsic energy, the vital force. Kundalini is thought to be the evolutionary force within the body, but these are all aspects of the same thing. And this talk that went on was very important because these yogis were devoting their entire lives to spiritual practice and were doing some rather strenuous practices having to do with Kundalini. I would say not only strenuous, but in some cases rather dangerous. I have seen yogis meditating with water up to their neck, not because they liked swimming or because they wanted to horse around in the water, but to keep them cool, because the flow of this Kundalini force through the body caused tremendous heat. And they were doing this in order to get results that would be very extreme. But we who do Tai Chi Chih are working with the same forces without any of the dangers and any of the difficulties. We simply make some simple movements. We move the chi or the prana, and the way that we are doing it helps to balance it so that the negative and positive are brought into balance. Chi is a very deep subject that we could talk about for a very long time.
Well, I think that one of the important things that you just said right now was that our audiences can feel very safe, that what they're doing with their Tai Chi Chih practice is very safe, that they won't be harmed in any way, shape, or form.
How can you be harmed doing a simple movement such as that? The great Chinese scholar and teacher, Wenshan Wang, from whom I learned a lot, used to talk about the chi a priori and the chi a posteriori, meaning the chi with which you came into this life and the chi that you accumulated during the lifetime. And Tai Chi Chih is very helpful in this respect. A great deal of chi is accumulated, and it is stored either 2 inches below the navel or in the bones. Being stored in the bones, of course, it hardens the bones. And as you know, as people grow older, sometimes their bones become rather brittle. And the chi is probably responsible for the fact that dentist has a very difficult time getting dental floss through my teeth. It hardens the gums and brings them closer together. So there are many, many ways to use chi and get the benefits. And we are getting all those, I believe, in our Tai Chi Chih practice.
Well, I think that as people do this Tai Chi Chih, they're going to feel this chi. It's nice to know that it's something very safe that they're working with because it is Tai Chi Chih, and that as they go along, they're going to get better and better at knowing how this chi works in their own body.
They don't even have to know it. All they have to do is do it.
That's true, too. When the student begins to practice, he knows that something is flowing inside of him. And then, as time goes by, he begins to become aware that there are more levels to Tai Chi Chih than he realized in the beginning, that he's beginning to tap into the essence of Tai Chi Chih.
The essence of Tai Chi Chih. Let me tell you a story having to do with that. One time I was practicing Tai Chi Chih in a Japanese garden, and as I was doing movements and enjoying motion, suddenly I realized that nobody was doing anything. Tai Chi Chih was doing Tai Chi Chih. In other words, I had gotten myself out of the way. This is a very ecstatic feeling, and it has a lot to do with the essence of Tai Chi Chih. It won't take very long for practitioners to get to that point where they feel that the effort is the effort of no effort, that things flow by themselves. And when this happens, there is a feeling which is hard to describe. Perhaps I can best describe it by using the Chinese word de, T-E-H, which is usually translated as the power of inner sincerity. Now, when people who practice Tai Chi Chih and become good at it decide they want to become teachers and take a teacher's training course, which is quite intensive for 1 week, when they come there, the first lesson that they will learn is that good teaching not only means repetition, it also means the power of inner sincerity. And I believe it is because of De that these teachers have spread Tai Chi Chih through most of the world. because they are sincere teachers and because they have experienced the essence of Tai Chi Chih, I think it's very easy for them to get it across to the students. There are no tricks and there are no hype. It's just very simple movement. And then after a while, of course, you begin to get the essence of Tai Chi Chih. I would say that after you do Tai Chi Chih for quite a while and begin to realize the essence, much to your surprise, you will find you get to a stage where you can do it mentally. That won't happen in a few weeks, but it means that you can be sitting in a concert or on a plane, closing your eyes, you'll begin to do the movements mentally, and much to your surprise, you will find that the Qi begins to flow and it's being balanced. So in any circumstance, you are able to do Tai Chi Chih.
Well, that certainly takes it out of the realm of just going around and just being able to do it with your hands and your feet, that there's something else going on, that maybe Tai Chi Chih is affecting you on more levels than just the physical.
I believe that the essence of Tai Chi Chih comes across very well to all people who practice it sincerely. One thing that they should remember is the Tai Chi Chih practice is cumulative. That is, the effects, the results are cumulative. You begin to accumulate Qi. Do you remember I spoke about the Qi with which you came into this life and the Qi that you accumulate in this life? And as you accumulate this Qi, it is stored in the bones and stored below the navel. And when this happens, of course, the bones are firmer. It has quite an effect upon the health. But I think the greatest effect that one can have is to begin to realize the essence of what is happening. The life force is flowing freely through you. It is being balanced. You yourself are out of the way. Now you understand the essence of Tai Chi Chih.
In other words, you can relate to people much more easily because you know so much more about yourself.
When you're at home with yourself, it's much easier to relate to other people.
What can you tell us about yin and yang?
In Chinese cosmology, yin and yang are the basis of the universe. Yin is the negative energy, yang is the positive energy. Yin corresponds to the moon because it is cold and corresponds to the kidneys in the body. Yang, the positive, which corresponds to heat, is the same as the sun, and in the body, the heart. Now, yin and yang are both always present, but in various relationships. Our aim in Tai Chi Chih is to bring the yin and the yang into balance. Very often in our way of life, we tend to eat too many sweets, we get a little canker sore on the tongue, and that means that we're overly yin. We're not as apt to be overly yang. When we are overly yin and we do Tai Chi Chih, it tends to bring us back into balance, which is desirable because not only is the bodily condition better at that time, but it seems to have quite an effect upon our lives.
Well, this effect that it has, it seems that Tai Chi Chih affects us in a lot of different ways, but we don't always think about it in terms of this wonderful balance that's going on.
I can't think of anything more important, to tell you the truth. That's a personal opinion. When we are able to bring the yin and yang into balance and the metabolism is in balance, changes take place. I'll give you an example. For instance, there was a woman from London, a nurse, who came over here to take the Tai Chi Chih teacher's training course. She became a teacher. After she had been doing Tai Chi Chih for quite some time, her children came to her and said, "Mommy, you don't yell at us anymore in the morning and you don't kick the cat. What's happened?" And her husband said, "You seem to have lots of energy when you come home from work, cook the dinner, you're good company," and so forth. Now, she hadn't noticed these changes. Others had to tell her about it. and this happens very frequently. But as the yin and yang are brought into balance, first they must be circulated, and then they are brought into balance. Then we may note changes in the way we feel, in our energy level, and so forth and so on. And of course, yang, the great heat, which corresponds to the sun, and yin, which corresponds to the moon, are always with us. In Chinese cosmology, they are the basis of the universe.
These sound like weighty matters, but we don't have to give a lot of mental thought to these things. One of the things I've heard you say so often is just by doing the Tai Chi Chih, we begin to find this balance, and then other people will tell us, oh, look how much better you are doing, you're more balanced. And sometimes they even use that word.
If we could come perfectly into balance, we would be entering what is called the uncarved block, which would be an ideal condition. That isn't likely, but we can come very close to being in balance. This makes all the difference that you can think of. And so often we get letters or we get phone calls telling us about changes that take place in people's lives as they bring the yin and yang into balance. And then they always say, well, this doesn't have anything to do with Tai Chi Chih, does it? And the answer always is, what's the difference? It's happening.
Well, it does make a difference, and we're glad that it does. And we're very appreciative of what you had to share with us about yin and yang.
Yin and yang are very important, and I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about it.
Nobody thinks that they're at their optimum weight. Can Tai Chi Chih have an effect on weight control?
Very definitely. It's my opinion that Tai Chi Chih is one of the best weapons that we can have in bringing the weight to an optimum level. What it does, it is not the effort, it's not the muscular effort that does it. It is the flow of the chi, which dries up the aqueous excess, that is the excess fluid. And it is that excess fluid which causes overweight. Now, when somebody begins to practice regularly, he or she may find the weight is going off without any effort. I know of one case where it didn't take any dieting at all, and yet there were wonderful results. There was a fellow named John who was in one of my very early classes, and he later went on to become a teacher. John weighed about 255 pounds, and he was rather embarrassed by his appearance because he was quite pudgy. He did a lot of Tai Chi Chih for a number of months, I think it was 5 or 6 months, and at the end of that time, he had gone from 255 pounds to 180. His wife looked up one day and found she had a handsome husband. And it changed many things about him. It changed his whole personality as well. What is interesting is that his best friend lived with them. His best friend was 6 feet 3 inches tall, weighed 155 pounds, which is much underweight, ate the same food, did the same amount of Tai Chi Chih, and over the same period of time found that his weight went from 155 pounds to 170 pounds. Now, how is this possible? What happens is that the metabolism tends to balance out. In his case, there was no need to lose weight. There was no aqueous excess to get rid of. So they both felt better at the end of that period of time.
Well, these are two very dramatic stories. One went up, the other went down. So this is a good thing. It helps us in our own unique way, is that right?
If what we're looking for is weight control, the flow of the chi is the most efficient way that I know to do it, and do it effortlessly. But there is one other case which is more dramatic. There was a woman who later became a teacher who lived in a Midwestern town. She was very, very much overweight. She had the misfortune to contract a potentially fatal disease. The doctors wanted to put her in a scanning machine, and she was too big. They told her to lose weight. That is the reason she took up Tai Chi Chih at that time. She practiced very faithfully over quite a period of time, at the end of which, she says, she had lost 100 pounds. I was very skeptical until she brought out her skirts of that time, which were 4 inches larger than her current waistline. Then she went on to become a teacher, and today is a very active teacher, doing well, and has no problem at all in keeping from gaining the weight back, because doing this much teaching, she constantly has the qi flowing, and the metabolism tends to reach an optimum level that way. So in both these cases, it made a decisive change in people's lives. If one is looking for weight control, he or she might try Tai Chi Chih practice with the attendant flow of the qi.
The lady that you're talking about, I saw the skirt that you're talking about. It was very impressive to see what had happened to her.
It was, and there have been other cases. Quite a few people who came because of certain diseases later wound up as teachers and forgot all about what was wrong with them.
Well, that's always a good thing to happen, isn't it?
It's a desirable result, and the way to get it is to practice Tai Chi Chih, we hope.
Is Tai Chi Chih an exercise? I feel great benefits in my body when I do it. I feel stronger, I feel more energized. And other people say, is it a meditation? I feel very quiet, very serene, very contemplative when I'm finished doing Tai Chi Chih. What would you say?
I don't think of Tai Chi Chih either as exercise or meditation. It is true that the movements exercise the internal organs, which can be very important and contain many benefits. And for this reason, I want to warn people, after you do Tai Chi Chih practice, don't drink something cold right away. But when I think of exercise, I think of perspiration and getting tired. You go out and you run 3 miles, and you come back, bathe in perspiration, and you step on a scale, you've lost a couple of pounds, you drink some water, you eat your dinner, and you've got the couple of pounds back. But this isn't a description of Tai Chi Chih at all. We don't tend to perspire doing Tai Chi Chih, and while it is great at controlling weight, it isn't done through effort. It is the effort of no effort that does it. As regards meditation, anybody watching a group practicing Tai Chi Chih will notice the difference in the expression after half an hour or so. When people come in, they may be under a lot of pressure. Perhaps they just came off a freeway, they had a tough day at the office, and so forth. But as class wears on, you begin to see a different kind of look. They begin to relax and even to yawn. And then as you get close to the end of the class, feeling good, they're rather sorry that it's all over for the day. Of course, they can go home and practice if they want. So I don't think of it as exercise or meditation, though certainly it has the benefits of both.
Well, this is good to know so that people essentially can take it individually. They can think of it, they can do it in any way that is best for them, is what you're saying.
As long as they do it correctly.
That's true.
That's very important. This energizing business is very interesting. I had an 89-year-old student named Mimi, and while she was taking her course, her beginning course, she one night said, "I'm going square dancing." And I said, "Mimi, you've been exercising or moving for an hour and 15 minutes. Aren't you tired?" She said, "Tired? I do Tai Chi Chih." And many people feel this energizing effect almost immediately. But it is good to remember, because of this, I would not practice Tai Chi Chih after dinner at night. Do it in the morning and the late afternoon. If you practice it in the evening, you may be so energized that you don't feel like sleeping.
I've had some students tell me that they couldn't figure out why they'd been so tired when they went to bed, and then later on They were wide awake. I asked them, did you do your Tai Chi Chih? And they said, yes.
That's the key question. Did you do it? The benefits come by themselves. You don't have to practice, or you don't have to rather tell people that they're going to come. Just do the practice and see. And they usually tell their teachers about it afterwards. So while we are not really exercising, what we are doing is doing movements. Some of them are very quiet movements. And we're not really meditating in the true sense. At the same time, we are getting the benefits of both. But it isn't important to analyze it or rationalize it in any way. The important thing is the practice and then the results of the practice.
Effects that Tai Chi Chih is having in their lives, some of them are pretty astounding, but I'm sure that as the originator, you've heard even more about Tai Chi Chih. Share some with us.
Many people do write, yes, and say what is happening. Some of them are rather minor, and occasionally they're very major. The first example is a rather minor one. In the very early days of Tai Chi Chih, I taught a young lady who was a real estate agent. She was very shy and had trouble approaching people. One day when I was downtown, I bumped into her, and she was sitting in her car talking on a car phone long before telephones were customary in cars. When she got through, I said, "Hey, what's going on here?" And she said, "Well, you know, I seem to have a lot of confidence. I'm making sales. I start out the day with a lot of optimism. Doesn't have anything to do with Tai Chi Chih, does it?" And my answer was, "What's the difference? It's happening." The second example had to do with a doctor who was from East Asia, a medical doctor. And when he took his lessons, he confided in me that for 9 years he had had high blood pressure and that he was having problems reducing it. He was trying to skip rope 1,000 or 2,000 times a day, which enabled him to lose weight, but that wasn't what he was aiming at. After he had done Tai Chi Chih for a little while, he found that his blood pressure dropped. But he thought it was probably a coincidence, so he stopped doing Tai Chi Chih for a week or so, and then it went up again. After that, he came to me and he said, "Justin, I will be doing this practice for the rest of my life."
I had the same story told to me by a fireman, and it was pretty amazing. He was very impressed too.
Well, it was important to him. Now, a major experience was this one. There was a young lady of 21 who had suffered an infirmity from birth and consequently was slightly backward. Her mother became a Tai Chi Chih teacher and taught her daughter how to do it, and the daughter practiced regularly. Then she wrote me a letter that said, one day as she was practicing, suddenly she stopped with the feeling that she had all knowledge. Now remember, this was a backward girl, all knowledge. She said at that time, perspiration was running down her body and that she was laughing and crying at the same time, but she was crying from joy. That is a perfect description of a Satori enlightenment experience. This girl, in doing her Tai Chi Chih practice, had had an enlightenment experience, which is a way of proving to me that more is happening than meets the eye. I, of course, wrote her mother and said, "Please keep me informed about this girl. Let's see if this carries over and lasts, and be sure she continues to do her practice."
And you've heard from them since?
No, it wasn't very long ago. I expect to, though.
Well, I would imagine so. There are so many stories that happened with people, and each one is wonderful. Tai Chi Chih doesn't promise anything, but it's amazing to me what people themselves share with us.
I don't like to hold out this promise as a carrot that will lead you on. I'd rather say to somebody, practice and see what happens, because each person is an individual case. But many older people have written to me and said, not only has Tai Chi Chih improved their physical balance, That is the way they stand on their feet and so forth. But it has also hardened the bones so they don't seem quite as susceptible to falls that shatter the bones. Various people get various benefits, and I'm sure each one of your students who practices will know what we're talking about.
What can you tell us about Seijaku?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this subject. Seijaku is one of the 7 principles of a Zen garden. As you said, it means stillness in the midst of activity, but it doesn't mean stillness by getting away and hiding. It doesn't mean, oh, if there were only no phones or my family wasn't around or there were no business problems. You can get away, but you can't get away from yourself. What it says is that right in the midst of the turmoil, one finds a center of stillness. And I learned this great lesson when I was staying at a small Zen temple in Kyoto. The head priest there evidently was annoyed by something I said. So he turned to me and he said, "Don't be the small hermit, be the big hermit." And his wife came out and she went like this, showing a flower opening. It was quite a lesson. But I didn't think much about it until about a year later, when I was living with the yogis in the mountains of India. And one day, after I had been there for a while, I was thinking back about Japan. Now, at that time, I couldn't have cared less about the world. All I was thinking about was my own self-improvement, meditating, and so forth. But this particular moment, suddenly, the voice of that priest came to me, "Be the big hermit." And I thought, what am I doing here? I ought to be able to do this at 42nd Street and Broadway. I left the ashram in the mountains the next day, and shortly after left India. So the lesson, be the big hermit, got across to me very strongly.
Sounds like it was an important lesson.
It was an important lesson. And it is only possible to experience that stillness when there is a centering, what I call in my books the growth of certainty. Once you have this growth of certainty, then you're not tossed around like a tumbleweed. You know where you stand, what you should be doing, what you yourself represent. And to give you an example of how important this is, one day in ancient China, there was a Zen monk walking along the streets. It was a very rainy day. And suddenly he saw, in the midst of a puddle, he saw a tiny scorpion that was drowning. Without thinking, he went over, picked it out, and as he did so, the scorpion bit him. Oof. Anybody who's been bitten by a scorpion knows how that feels. He put the scorpion down, and this perverse little scorpion promptly turned around and walked right back into the puddle. Once again, without thinking, he bent over, picked it out, whoop. Then he put it down on the ground. And a bystander watching all this walked over to the monk and said, "You fool, don't you know that every time you pick that scorpion up, he's going to sting you?" The monk replied, "Yes, I do realize it. It's in his nature to sting me. But I also realize that it's in my nature to keep picking him out of the water." Now there's a man who's experienced the growth of certainty. There's a centering there. He knows how he stands. He's experiencing Seijaku.
It's a very wonderful feeling to experience that stillness inside. Kind of like being in the eye of a storm, isn't it?
Yes, and once you get that, it doesn't leave you.
It's something that we can learn to do or come upon us as we're doing our Tai Chi Chih movements.
I think Tai Chi Chih is a very helpful way to experience that centering.
But as we study Tai Chi Chih, as we learn what happens inside of us, we begin to find that maybe there's more to this strength business than we thought.
Very definitely. I had an older woman as a student in a class once, and after the class she came up to me and she apologized. She said, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "Well, what did you do?" She said, "Well, I accidentally tore the phone book." I said, "Tore the phone book?" She said, yes, I didn't mean to do it. I'm sorry. I said, wait a minute. In other days in the circus, the strong man used to tear a phone book as a feat of strength, and you did it accidentally? She said yes, and she was sorry she had done it. Now, many people have had this type of experience, and that they find that there is a strength, sometimes coming from very old people, that greatly surpasses muscular strength. I'll give you an example of this, which I find very interesting. I had a friend in Los Angeles who taught Tai Chi Chuan. He was Chinese, and he was a wonderful physical specimen. He was also a black belt judo man. Now, he had a friend who was larger than he was, who was a black belt judo man and taught Tai Chi Chuan. These two, one was 200 pounds, one was well over 225 pounds. These two heard that an Asian master, probably from China, was coming to San Francisco, and they decided to go up and see him. They arrived there, but when they saw him, they were disappointed. He was very old. He probably weighed about 85 pounds, and he wasn't very prepossessing looking. Nevertheless, they had come a long way. So they asked him this question. All our lives, we've been hearing about this chi. Can you demonstrate it to us? The old man thought a moment or two. He said, I'll tell you what, you two fellows separate and come at me and throw me down. My friend said, we'll kill you. He said, do me the honor of not taking it easy with me. Well, the two big guys huddled, and one said, I'll tell you what, you throw him and I'll catch him before he hits the mat. We don't want to hurt the little fellow. There was quite an audience watching this, as a matter of fact. The two big guys went out to the side, separated, and came at him, watching his breath, doing everything that they had been taught to do. And suddenly they lunged at him. Then what the spectators saw was this. The big fellow was thrown up against the wall, and a fleck of blood came from his nose. My friend was thrown 15 feet away, lying on the ground with his glasses knocked off. He said that he was looking for the freight train that had hit him. What is remarkable is that none of the spectators saw this little man move at all. Now, does that give you the power that a master has over the chi?
That's quite an impressive story.
And the same story occurs in a famous book called Magic and Magicians in Tibet by Madame David Neal. It's quite ordinary.
Are there any other faculties that the chi affects?
Yes, I think that you'll find it will affect the intuitive quality, the intuition. I remember the first time I picked up a phone book and opened it right to the page I wanted to. But other people tell me they have started toward the phone and then the phone would ring after that. Many things will show the intuitive strength that grows. And I hope one day, because of this growth, that athletes in athletic terms will begin to examine a maximum chi program for physical fitness and for developing greater strength and the intuitive quality that goes with it.
Looks like we have a lot to look forward to with our Tai Chi Chih practice.
I hope so.
Well, we'll just continue to work with this and see what happens. I know that our audience has already started to feel some of these wonderful effects.
Good.
How do they become teachers?
It's a good question, because I would like the viewers to know that those who are accredited teachers have gone through definite training to do so. Let's say that somebody decides to first study Tai Chi Chih. Either that person studies with an accredited teacher, or if there's none in the vicinity, can learn through your videotape or my videotape, and then can begin practicing by him or herself. Now, after practicing a while and getting quite skilled at it, that person might decide that he or she would like to go on and pass this on to others. because he or she may have been getting great benefits from it. If he or she decides that, then there must be a recommendation from an accredited teacher, a letter written saying that this person does Tai Chi Chih well and has the right attitude. If that letter is written, then he or she will be accepted into one of the 5 or 6 teachers training courses we have in various parts of the country during the year. That course lasts for 6 days, and it's very intensive. You are not there to learn how to do Tai Chi Chih. You're there to learn how to teach it, and you're also there to learn how to present it to groups. When you come out of there, usually you're accredited. Not everybody is, but I would say 98% of the people are ready. They come out as accredited teachers and begin spreading Tai Chi Chih, and then get the great joy of seeing the faces of their students, the serenity, the enthusiasm, and everything else.
They also come out from there with something else that's very, very important, and that is De. It's not something we teach them, it's something that they have developed from inside.
De, T-E-H, the Chinese word, which means the power of inner sincerity, is the basis of good teaching. If you're just trying to be glib and get across with a minimum of effort, it doesn't work. Your students know very well what you're carrying inside you. So I would say the power of inner sincerity is the biggest reason that Tai Chi Chih has spread around the world as rapidly as it has.
Which brings me to another question. Is Tai Chi Chih a martial art?
No, it certainly is not a martial art.
Very different.
Now, as you know, I have great respect for Tai Chi Chuan, which I taught for many years. But the purpose of Tai Chi Chih is different. The Japanese call it Naikan, the Chinese call it Neigun, and they both mean inner efficiency. In other words, although you're working with the hands, the legs, the outer parts of the body, what you are developing is something inside. And that is quite different from learning how to throw somebody through the air or to punch somebody or commit some sort of violence. Many times I've had students write me that they have had experiences, one in a dream, when a voice came to him and said, "This is not the way." He had had all sorts of fantasies about doing violence with the moves that he had learned. After that, when he woke up in the morning, he decided from now on it was all going to be inner. And of course, there's a great deal of love that goes with that. So it is to be stressed that if you're looking for is action, that is throwing people through the air in forms of violence, you might be unhappy with Tai Chi Chih. However, there is nothing wrong with doing these other disciplines. It simply is that Tai Chi Chih has an entirely different outlook, leading to serenity, physical fitness, and so forth.
Well, I think that for our purposes, that is exactly what we want.
Yes, I would say outer cultivation and inner development, and if you put those two together, the results sometimes are very rewarding.
Justin, after what you've told us, I think that our viewers will look forward to further studies of Tai Chi Chih with an accredited teacher.
Let's hope so. I don't think they'll be sorry if they do it.
Whether it be music or poetry, maybe even a term paper. And it's always very inspiring to hear them say that they think that this happened best after doing their Tai Chi Chih practice. Could this really be a result of Tai Chi Chih?
I think the Tai Chi Chih practice, that is the flow of the Chi, definitely stimulates the aesthetic sensibilities and the creative urge, and perhaps you could say the creative abilities. People have told me that after doing Tai Chi Chih for a while, when they would go to a concert, they would realize that suddenly they were hearing the music for the first time. The heightened aesthetic sensibilities made it possible for them to really get into the music and enjoy it. In my own case, as you know, I'm active in music, in painting, and in writing. And usually my work is done spontaneously. I don't plan it out in advance. Sometimes, however, I'll sit down at the piano, for instance, and nothing of interest comes. When that happens, I'll just drop it, get up, and do Tai Chi Chih practice, and maybe even a little Seijaku, which is advanced Tai Chi Chih. Then if I sit down to write or to play music or whatever, I find that it just flows by itself. It's almost as though I'm a spectator. And I have the feeling that what comes without effort is the best. That turns out very well. So you could say that stimulating the flow of the Qi will greatly help you in doing your creative work, which can not only be painting or something of that nature, it can be making money, it can be doing anything else. Now, I've also found out in my travels that highly spiritual people usually tend to be deeply aesthetic people. For instance, the ancient Chinese masters, the Zen masters, and Japanese Zen masters very often excelled in calligraphy, in painting, and particularly in poetry. They brought great truths to the surface in their poetry and sometimes their humorous pictures. And this got across very well. I can only assume that this has to do with the flow of the Qi as well.
Well, some of these works are very, very touching. Sometimes from a quiet point and sometimes from a very humorous point. But can this Tai Chi Chih practice, can it bring to the surface something that's not there, creative ability that isn't inside?
I don't see how it can make somebody creative, but almost everybody has inherent abilities, inherent creativity, aesthetic sensibility, and so forth. In addition to this, it very, very often stimulates humor. Paul Reps, the Zen writer, who did these black and white pictures to go with his work, usually did his work in a humorous manner. It was only after you left that you realized there was a deep meaning to it, and his were completely spontaneous. But as to becoming a great pianist simply because the Qi is flowing, I'd say no. First you do your finger exercises, you learn to play the piano, then you will find that your ability is greatly heightened by the flow of the Qi. Scholars and others who do a lot of studying may find that it helps very much too in their work.
I think that, well, even people who have kind of a terror or fear of doing any kind of writing find that they're inspired to do some.
Well, as you know, when the Tai Chi Chih quarterly journal comes out, there's always great poetry in it, almost without exception. And these were people who had never written poetry before. Your things are great. And I believe that this has been heightened by the flow of the Qi. But then the whole art of life is heightened, I think, by the flow of the Qi.
I tell people to practice, and every time that you've talked, you've also talked about practice. Do you do a Tai Chi practice every day?
I certainly do, sometimes twice a day. There's a good deal of difference in how you feel if you get up in the morning and do your Tai Chi Chih practice. It stays with you all day. Chinese have a saying which is, you cannot appease the hunger by reading the menu. You've heard that before. You have to eat the food in order to get the nourishment. Same thing happens with Tai Chi Chih. Regular practice means that it will gradually accumulate because Tai Chi Chih practice is cumulative. The flow of the Qi and the balancing of the Qi are cumulative in effect. And after a while, friends may say to you, they notice while you're practicing, there's a slight trembling in the fingers. The energy has accumulated and is coming out in that way. Now, if you don't practice, it's similar to the idea that I tell you about chocolate, what chocolate is, what the ingredients are, how it's shipped to this country, and how it is disposed of, and so forth. You won't know anything about chocolate. But if I hand you a chocolate bar and you take a bite, you taste it, then you know what chocolate is. So it is important to remember you must practice if you want to get the benefits of Tai Chi Chih. And it is best to practice every day if you can. And again, I want to remind you that the effects are cumulative. The chi will be stored in the bones and will accumulate 2 inches below the navel. It's there when it's needed. Perhaps you'll find that the bones get much harder, not brittle, and subject to accident, to falls and so forth. At any rate, it's not hard to practice because practice is very joyous. You get so you enjoy it.
Well, that's very, very true. The students are always saying that on the days that they don't practice, they notice that something is missing from their day.
As to practice, my suggestion is that you work out a routine. I do think that once you learn all the movements, that it would be good to practice every morning for 20 or 25 minutes. After a while, you may enjoy it enough so that you make it a little longer. If you find that there is some movement that bothers you, just skip it. Do the ones that you enjoy and get the benefits from them. But practice them enthusiastically and do not practice them carelessly. That's very, very important. Now, if you have time when you come home from school or from work or whatever, late in the afternoon, try to get in 5 minutes, 10 minutes of practice before dinner. You'll find you may be a little sleepy when you start, but then you'll be wide awake to enjoy your dinner. However, it is important to stress that you shouldn't practice after dinner at night. Why? Because the energy that is generated may very well keep you awake, may cut into your sleep. 2 o'clock in the morning, you'll feel like running down the street instead of getting the restful sleep that you need.
There have been many who have wondered about that. They've tried it just to see if it was really true what I was telling them about it keeping them awake, and it did.
How many times you should practice each movement is, of course, up to you. We usually practice in groups of 9. Do the movement 9 times, or do it 18 times, or do it 36 times. A couple of teachers have, at one time or another, practiced one movement several hundred times and got a good deal from it. You'll have to work out your own practice schedule according to the amount of time that you have, but be sure to do it.
Well, I agree with you. It doesn't matter whether we have 5 minutes or 10 minutes of practice, that it's always good to practice. So I think that with that thought, since this is our last program, thank you so much for having been with us. We'll just continue to practice and see where our practice leads us. It seems to be going in a good direction.
Thank you for inviting me, Carmen.